Hey guys, tonight we plunge into the powdery, perfumed, and faintly blood-scented world of 18th century French barbers. You shuffle into a narrow, candlelit barber shop just off a cobbled Parisian alley. The wooden floor creaks beneath your boots. There's a faint scent of old shaving cream, damp wool, and questionable dental hygiene floating in the air. A wigged man gestures you to the chair. His tools clink ominously in a tray nearby. Somewhere behind you, someone groans, and you realize this isn't just a place for haircuts. It's where minor surgery, tooth extractions, and enough gossip to fill Versailles go down. You probably won't survive this with all your teeth intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from some distant corner of the globe, drop your location and the local time in the comments below. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slouch in the barber's chair, staring up at curls of smoke from the fire. The barber's fingers poke through a box of razors and scissors, selecting one at random with the flair of a stage magician. He wears a powdered wig, pristine and towering, but his apron is stained with something that definitely isn't pomade. In France during the 1700s, barbers were much more than your neighborhood hair shapers. They were community fixtures. A visit to the shop wasn't merely about aesthetics. It was part hygiene ritual, part medical procedure, part confessional booth. You could get your beard trimmed, a boil lanced, and a family scandal dissected all in one sitting. And the gossip. The barber shop was the proto-social media feed. Here, the nobility's latest affairs and the merchants' crumbling investments made the rounds faster than a powdered wig on a windy bridge. Some barbers cultivated reputations as discreet conversationalists, while others, well, let's just say the walls had ears and they used the info as leverage. One common service might raise a modern brow: bloodletting. It sounds medieval because it kind of was, but it persisted well into the Enlightenment. The barber would nick your vein and bleed you until your humors felt balanced, or until you fainted. Some patrons genuinely believed it detoxed the body. Others did it to impress neighbors with their dedication to personal wellness. You, unfortunately, get the fainting version. On any given day, your barber might sharpen his razor on a leather strap while listening to two regulars dissect the politics of Versailles. Did you hear what the Dauphin wore to last Thursday's supper? Might segue into, did you know Pierre down the street had 3 teeth yanked and didn't scream once? In one corner, a child watches with wide eyes as the barber finishes a shave. Then, in the same breath, the man wipes his blade and says, "Now about your tooth." A scream follows, but it's muffled by the creak of the door, the jingle of coins in a pouch, and the murmur of another customer arriving. To avoid drawing suspicion or becoming the center of unwanted drama, you learn to nod at the right moments and laugh at slightly scandalous anecdotes even when your jaw aches and your scalp stings. Historians still argue whether barbers were trusted allies of their communities or dangerous purveyors of half-baked medical wisdom. And as you settle further into the narrative, try not to squirm as you learn that the same blade used to sculpt the Countess's elegant neckline might have been the one plunged into a boil on the baker's back just hours earlier. Cleanliness standards weren't exactly enforced. Though some barbers took pride in their tool maintenance, others took pride in speed. By dusk, the place fills with chatter and the scent of fresh shaving soap mingling with faint traces of coppery blood. You wake early, dreading your apprenticeship at the corner shop, with the sun barely nudging past the rooftops. The air smells like stale tobacco and cold porridge, and already your hands ache in anticipation. This isn't some gentle grooming school. You're entering a profession where the razors are sharp, the tempers sharper,
and the patients have more complaints than teeth. In 18th century France, becoming a barber surgeon wasn't just about learning to wield scissors with flair. It meant surviving a punishing gauntlet of hours-long tasks, humiliations, and bodily fluids. You'd be lucky if your training involved more scalpels than mop buckets. The official apprenticeship usually lasted several years, during which you'd fetch water, scrub tools with questionable rags, and, if you were lucky, remove pustules under supervision. Like baking, but without the yeast and with much more screaming. Your mentor doesn't coddle. He slams open the shop's warped wooden door and grunts something about guts and garters. First rule, he says, don't flinch. Then he demonstrates by lancing a boil on a burly merchant's shoulder with a blade that may or may not have sliced bread that morning. You learn to nod, pretend to take notes, and mentally prepare for your own turn. To become a full-fledged barber surgeon, you need to master hairdressing, shaving, minor surgery, and, here's the kicker, dental extraction. This last bit is taught with the subtlety of a sadistic puppet show. There's a metal tool called a dental pelican, named for the bird because it dives in, clamps onto the tooth, and yanks upward. Sometimes with a crunch, sometimes with a snap, and sometimes nothing happens except your patient screaming and accusing you of witchcraft. Historians still argue whether these apprenticeships were formal training programs or glorified child labor, your instructor says between pulls on a pipe. You smile weakly while cradling a cloth soaked in spit and blood from a particularly hostile extraction earlier that morning. The working hours aren't great either. Dawn to dusk, and sometimes beyond, because people don't schedule toothaches. They erupt violently, usually after dessert, and the patient ends up banging on your shop door while you try to enjoy a lukewarm bowl of lentils. To pad your income, you learn to upsell. Tooth extraction? How about a shave too? Or maybe a quick ear powdering? You learn to position these offers with charm and a slightly threatening grin. Clients rarely say no. At night, instead of practicing swordplay or composing poetry like nobler tradesmen, you clean blooded tools, prepare leeches, and sew rudimentary stitches across torn cheeks. One evening, a butcher collapses in the chair. You pump his arm to find a vein, nick it, and pray the bleeding brings balance. All while your mentor critiques your posture. The worst part? Tooth extractions aren't your first operation. They're your warm-up act. You start with lancing abscesses, and sometimes you're tasked with fixing broken noses or slicing open cysts that look like they're preparing for a small rebellion. You don't operate, your mentor jokes. You negotiate with fluids. One particularly bad day, a molar refuses to budge. The patient, an elderly woman with hands like talons, slaps you mid-yank, calls you a demon, and storms off with half her gum exposed. You stare at the tooth still sitting smugly in her jaw and contemplate other career paths, maybe coopering. And though it's brutal, something inside you adapts. Your hands steady, your eyes spot cavities before the lamp even swings overhead. You can tell the difference between an infected molar and an angry ulcer by smell alone. It's grossly impressive. In fact, as the weeks pass, you find a rhythm in the absurdity. Blood? You've bled sheep during festivals. This is just more expensive blood. Screams? You've heard worse from toddlers denied jam. You whisper jokes to yourself like, another day, another incisor, and pretend it's all perfectly normal. Your mentor eventually grunts in approval. "You're still here, eh?" he says, handing you a payment pouch filled with coins and a suspiciously soft biscuit. You're not sure if that's congratulations or lunch. And so, the brutal days bleed together, pun intended. You start to feel like an integral cog in the dental machine. Your hands are steadier, your patience, oddly enough, grows. And while you're still technically under supervision, you now perform simple extractions solo. You look back on your first week and laugh, gently, because your molars still ache in sympathy.
You drag yourself into the shop, bleary-eyed, just in time to see the barber preparing for what he affectionately calls arterial encouragement. No one in this century calls it bloodletting anymore with a straight face, except, of course, the French. It's your third week as an apprentice, and you've earned the dubious honor of passing the bowl that collects the evidence of healing. The client's face is pale but determined. A silk handkerchief clutches his wrist like a theatrical prop. "My bile is aggressive," he whispers. You nod solemnly as the barber ties off the arm, select his finest lancet, and makes the incision with a flourish that says, "I also style wigs." In 18th century France, bloodletting wasn't just medical, it was business. Fever? Bleed. Melancholy? Bleed. Excess of ambition? Definitely bleed. The four humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, were still very much in fashion, and bloodletting was considered the premier way to keep them in check. Historians still argue whether people felt better after these procedures or simply too weak to complain. Your job? Catch the blood and look like you believe in the process. Some barbers proudly displayed their bloodletting bowls on shelves like trophies. Brass, tin, or glazed ceramic, each one stained with the memory of nobles, butchers, and one guy who claimed to be a nail philosopher. You're careful not to spill. It's considered rude. Meanwhile, clients loved to brag about how often they'd been drained. One noblewoman reportedly had herself bled weekly before tea, insisting it kept her complexion luminous. You hear this and can't help but glance sideways at her dull cheeks and visible gum disease. But not all procedures went smoothly. You watch as the barber slices a bit deep and the client briefly swoons. There's a frantic scramble for salts. You wave a feathered fan, completely useless, and mutter, "I think the humors are, realigned." Sometimes the barber even recommends bloodletting for tooth pain. You'd think removing the tooth might help, but why stop there? "Let the pain escape through your veins," he says, which feels suspiciously poetic for someone whose apron smells like vinegar and regret. There's also cupping, where heated glass bulbs are placed on the skin to draw blood to the surface. You try it once and blister your thumb. Your mentor chuckles. Now you're getting the hang of it as you soak your wound in brine. You do learn one secret. Never bleed someone who's had fish and wine. The smell becomes a punishment all its own. And though patients wriggle, scream, faint, and occasionally slap you, they usually leave satisfied. Not from relief, but from a weird sense of accomplishment. Being bled is like having a tooth pulled. It becomes a story you milk for weeks. You hear clients say things like, "When Jacques opened my vein, I saw God." You nod solemnly while cleaning out the bowl. One afternoon, you discover a dusty book tucked beneath the counter, a treatise on the dangers of excessive bloodletting. It warns that too much can lead to shock, infection, and eventual death. Your mentor uses it to prop up a wobbly table. Later, you assist with a client who insists on being bled twice in one sitting. "I've had dreams," he says ominously. You make the cut, his blood flows, and then nothing. He stares at the bowl like it's the face of destiny. It's deeply unsettling, and you write about it in your secret journal, titled, "Please Let Me Cut Hair Again." Still, some clients refuse bloodletting altogether. They prefer tooth yanking or boil scraping,
You whisper your appreciation when one woman says, "Just shave me, no slicing." It's a rare win. And while you're growing numb to the grotesque, you still flinch when a drop hits your shoe. You started soaking your soles in vinegar at night, a tip passed down by apprentices with haunted eyes. By the end of the week, your hands reek of iron and clothes, and your dreams involve rivers of blood and chanting nobles. You're certain this is normal. But deep down, you begin to understand this isn't just barbering. It's a ritual, a blend of superstition and service. Your blade isn't just a tool, it's a scalpel for society's unease.
You shuffle into the shop, clutching your jaw, nursing what feels like a fiery beast burrowing in your molars. The pain pulses with every heartbeat, and you'd trade your inheritance for 1 minute of relief. The barber peers into your mouth, eyebrows lifting with professional horror. "Ah," he says, "an exquisite cavity, a testament to modern cuisine." You brace for sympathy. He reaches for his pliers instead. In 18th century France, dental hygiene wasn't exactly trending. Sugar consumption had skyrocketed thanks to colonial imports. Tea, chocolate, candied fruits, syrups, and everyone from duchesses to stable boys indulged with wild abandon. You try to recall the last time you brushed your teeth. Spoiler, you didn't. Toothbrushes were a luxury, often made from boar bristles and used more like decorative props than cleaning tools. Mouthwash? That was clove oil mixed with wine, if you were fancy. Otherwise, rinse with rainwater and cross your fingers. You sit as the barber lists common culprits: sticky tarts, boiled sweets, fermented fruit pastes. Your diet reads like a dentist's cautionary tale. Historians still argue whether sugar alone caused the epidemic or if poor nutrition made gums more vulnerable, he mutters while prodding a blackened bicuspid. It's starting to throb in rhythm with your pulse. Tobacco didn't help either. It was fashionable to smoke pipes after supper, and nothing quite blackens enamel like a few puffs on a tar-packed bowl. Some nobles even brushed their teeth with soot, convinced it was cleansing. You gag just thinking about it. Your barber stirs up a foul-smelling paste and dabs it on your gums. "Clove and vinegar," he says cheerfully, "plus a dash of powdered frog leg, just in case." You're too tired to protest. Meanwhile, the wealthy tried to hide their dental sins. Portraits show aristocrats tight-lipped, often avoiding smiles altogether. Some wore porcelain veneers, not for comfort, but for aesthetics. These fragile covers chipped easily and had to be glued on, sometimes with pitch. Imagine chewing with hot tar in your mouth. You wouldn't be smiling either. One nobleman, legend says, insisted on kissing the queen's hand despite his breath being compared to rotting citrus left in a boot. You grimace as the barber fans your face with a pamphlet, then picks up a mirror. "Let's take a peek before the storm." Your molar is gone, not pulled, just snapped off during breakfast. You nod, blinking tears as the barber discusses your dental future. You picture yourself as a gummy old poet, sipping broth and reciting verses about oral decay. Outside, children trade candy sticks from vendors, shouting about cavities for coins. It's hard to believe this is the world that celebrates dessert with such passion, yet fears the inevitable tooth collapse. You wonder if your descendants will inherit this cursed sweet tooth, and if they'll still whisper about cloves as the holy grail of mouth pain relief. Despite the agony, you feel oddly proud.
The barber compliments your stoic mouth posture. You write that down for future bragging rights. As you leave, the barber hands you a pouch of dried herbs, lavender, mint, and something that smells like sadness. Chew gently and avoid candied oranges. They'll take your remaining molars faster than a debt collector in Versailles. That night, you sleep with the pouch tucked under your pillow, whispering oaths against jelly confections and sweet almond paste. The pain still hums like an annoying symphony, but at least now you know what it means to suffer stylishly.
You slump into the barber's chair, feeling oddly philosophical. You're starting to accept that this place isn't a grooming salon. It's a battlefield masquerading as a spa. And today's war? Wounds of the face, facial injuries, abscesses, even jaw fractures. You glance at the tray. Scissors, razors, clamps, and something that looks suspiciously like it came from a blacksmith's toolkit. The barber greets you with a grin and a bloodied apron. "Just a trim," he teases, brandishing a hooked tool. You start to answer, but a toothless farmer barges in, clutching his jaw. "Horse kicked me," he mutters. The barber barely flinches. "Sit." In 18th century France, barbers weren't just stylists, they were trauma technicians. They cleaned wounds, stitched skin, and reset jaws, often using nothing more than gauze soaked in wine and the raw determination of someone who once styled wigs for a viscount. You'd expect hesitation. Instead, you get confidence bordering on madness. You learn that the line between a haircut and jaw surgery was razor thin, sometimes literally. A patient might come in for a shave and leave with fewer bones than expected. The barber launches into a story about a sailor who sneezed mid-extraction and ended up with one less molar and a new scar shaped like Corsica. You shiver politely. Historians still argue whether barbers offered genuine medical care or just winged it with flair and vinegar. Either way, the public kept coming back, possibly because actual physicians charged 3 times as much and wore terrifying wigs shaped like soufflés. Your mentor teaches you the split and stitch maneuver using a pig's head. He slices the cheek, pinches the wound closed, and sews with thread repurposed from an abandoned corset. "Sturdier than silk," he says, and you file that under knowledge I didn't want but now have. You're then taught to identify jaw dislocations. He explains, if the chin points east, pop it west. This method lacks precision but delivers results. One client leaves with a lopsided grin and newfound admiration for soft foods. To distract the wounded, barbers sometimes used humor. One popular gag, "Keep still or I'll fix your nose too." Others recited filthy limericks mid-extraction. You test this with a soldier who laughs so hard his stitches burst. You promise to stick to lullabies. Some shops had special chairs with adjustable headrests and arm restraints, for comfort, of course. You spot one with teeth marks on the wood. Comfort looks suspicious. In a corner cabinet lies the jaw clamp, a barbaric tool used to realign broken mandibles. You pray you'll never use it. But one day, a merchant staggers in with a sideways jaw and a vocabulary of groans. You assist in the procedure, which involves brute force, a spoon, and 3 Hail Marys. He leaves upright and thankful. You celebrate by not vomiting. Barbers also practiced minor amputations, especially if a finger or ear was halfway off already. One tale involves a baker with a partially severed thumb. The barber amputated cleanly,
bandaged with horsehair and charged extra for a precision finish. The baker returned the next week for a shave. You suspect Stockholm Syndrome. As dusk falls, you clean the tools and reflect on your day. You've helped patch a priest, reset a gambler's jaw, and reattach a noblewoman's earlobe with embroidery thread. You're not sure if you're proud or traumatized. One fringe theory you hear around the shop is that facial injuries release trapped evil. Open the skin, let sorrow bleed out. You nod slowly and back away from his clove-scented breath. That night, you sketch wound diagrams and label them like a demented artist. You're starting to see faces not as portraits, but as projects. It's unsettling. Still, the barber claps your shoulder and says, "You've got the hands for it." You reply, "Thanks. I miss when my hands held soup spoons." You sleep uneasily, dreaming of toothless mouths and whispering stitches.
You spend your afternoon chasing rumors, not of treason or romance, but of a man who calls himself Monsieur Don. The name itself is suspicious, and you soon learn he's one of many traveling dental performers who pitch tents near village squares, unroll velvet cloths across ale barrels, and extract teeth while singing lullabies. You follow the crowd, notebook in hand. These dental nomads were licensed, officially trained, or even sober half the time. But they were popular. More showman than surgeon, they made molar removal seem like a magic trick, complete with flourish, audience interaction, and an unhealthy dose of risk. One wore a cape made of old linen sheets. Another had bells stitched to his tunic, jingling ominously as he approached your trembling jaw. Monsieur Don performs beneath a canopy stitched together from discarded bridal veils. He winks, holds up a rotten tooth he just removed from a duchess, and tosses it dramatically into a bucket labeled souvenirs. You try not to vomit. Historians still argue whether these tooth pullers actually helped communities or just exacerbated public suffering while peddling snake oil remedies. Some provided temporary relief. Others left clients howling under the stars, clutching open wounds and regretting free entertainment. You watch as the show begins. Don selects a plump merchant with a wicked overbite and coaxes him into a wobbly chair. A trumpet blows. The merchant's head jerks forward. A tooth flies into the air. The crowd cheers. You feel vaguely unsafe. The tools are terrifying. Iron hooks, twisting wrenches, forceps shaped like bird beaks. The spectacle is half surgery, half circus. You overhear one vendor selling roasted chestnuts and a potion made from crushed snail shells, perfect for post-extraction healing. You consider burning the entire market down. Still, the townspeople swarmed these performers. Access to actual physicians was limited. Barbers required apprenticeships and approval from guilds. But these rogue specialists moved freely, charging coins for miracles and throwing in clove smoke as a bonus. You meet one traveler who claims he studied under a monk in Burgundy. He uses wine as an anesthetic and a poem as distraction. "I once removed 30 teeth in one sitting," he brags, "and only 2 people fainted." You wonder what the poem was. Not all tooth pullers were frauds. A few kept meticulous notes, dabbled in herbology, and genuinely sought ways to reduce pain. But for every cautious practitioner, there were 10 who believed in aggressive yanking as a personality trait. One fringe cure you hear: insert a sliver of wood soaked in pig urine between the infected tooth and cheek and whisper your birth date out loud. If the pain vanishes, thank the wood. If not, blame your mother's cooking. You write this down, just in case. The traveling performers often collected teeth for display. Some arranged into necklaces, others glued to boards labeled specimens of triumph.
You glance at a necklace and gag, convinced some of those teeth are still warm. As night falls, Monsieur Don packs up, stuffing tools into a stained sack and waving grandly. You notice the merchant still seated, a dazed look in his eyes and a mouthful of cotton. "Never felt a thing," he murmurs, which might be a lie. You return home shaken yet impressed. The spectacle, the charisma, the borderline criminality, it's all oddly captivating. You sketch Don's in your journal, give him 3 stars for flair, and add a note: don't ever sit in his chair. But you can't deny it. These traveling tooth thieves filled a societal need with drama and dubious technique. And somewhere between the agony and applause, you start to understand their strange appeal. You enter the shop with dread in your belly and a mint leaf between your teeth, a desperate, failing attempt to mask the smell of fear. The barber gestures toward the infamous chair with a wink. It creaks as you sit, every joint in the wood groaning like a haunted cello. This is not just furniture. This is the site of dozens, maybe hundreds, of grim oral battles. In 18th-century France, the barber's chair was equal parts throne and torture device. No soft cushions, no reclining mechanisms, just raw wood, leather straps, and one unfortunate headrest that looks like it's been gnawed on by fate. Once seated, you're a captive audience. The barber leans in, warm clove-scented breath, carrying promises of minimal pain and maximum drama. You grip the armrests while he preps the tools: forceps, pelicans, pincers. Some resemble medieval farming instruments. He hums a tune suspiciously named the Tooth Waltz. It's not soothing. Painkillers? You get a splash of brandy. Maybe 2 if you're aristocratic. Sometimes a clove is wedged between the gums, or a sprig of mint waved vaguely near your cheek. Distraction is key, the barber says, poking your jaw with something cold. Think of pleasant things: tulips, pies, not your tooth. The crowd gathers. Yes, a crowd. Tooth-pulling often doubled as entertainment. Neighbors leaned in, children made bets. One woman brings a sketchbook to capture the moment. You blink rapidly, trying not to cry. Historians still argue whether this dental theater was a necessity due to poor public health care or just communal masochism wrapped in tradition. Either way, the crowd's here, and so is your molar, barely hanging on to the gum like a defiant barnacle. The barber braces one hand against your forehead and inserts the tool. You pray. There's pressure, a crunch, and then the tooth is out, dangling in the air like a fish caught mid-leap. Applause erupts. A man tosses coins. Someone plays a tiny drum. You're handed the tooth wrapped in cloth and told, "Keep it, good for luck." In some villages, the pulled tooth was displayed publicly, hung on strings across the shop, or added to a bowl of local extractions. You wander over to peer inside. The bowl smiles back, dozens of molars in various stages of decay. You back away, silently vowing to never eat honey again. One fringe theory suggests barbers chose extraction days based on the phases of the moon. Molars come free during waning gibbous, your mentor once whispered. I suspect he was drunk. Still, he tracked lunar charts like a dental astrologer. Not all extractions went smoothly. You watch a young man scream as his incisor snap mid-yank, leaving a shard embedded in the gum. The barber says, "Bonus round," and dives back in. The crowd gasps. You begin biting your lip, not for pain,
just to avoid screaming in sympathetic terror. You learn that anticipation is often worse than the procedure. Clients arrive white-faced, clutching holy medals and whispering apologies to their teeth. You give pep talks. You say, "Think of it as a rite of passage." They weep. You weep. The floor is damp with fear and faint drops of blood. Some barbers developed signature extraction styles. One known as the twist involved a spin and pull motion. Another, called the sudden goodbye, required no warning whatsoever. You test both. Your hand cramps. The client leaves confused but cured. The barber hands you a pouch of dried sage and lavender. He says, "For your own courage." You carry it like a relic. The next day, a noblewoman requests the silent snap technique. You perform it flawlessly. She gives you a miniature painting of her mouth post-extraction. By evening, you've pulled 3 molars, sung twice to distract a nervous baker, and reattached a bleeding gum flap with embroidery thread. You stare into the mirror. Your hands tremble, but you smile. A gap-toothed, slightly deranged smile. You're becoming part of the chair's legend.
You're crouched behind the shop's curtain, sketchbook in hand, watching your mentor prepare for what he grandly calls La Grande Extraction. Today is market day, which means public demonstrations, free dentistry, and even freer trauma. The cobblestones outside shimmer with excitement and spilled cider as townsfolk gather around a makeshift stage. The barber beckons you forward, handing over a diagram labeled "Tooth Zones of Anguish." You squint at the inked molars, wondering if that smiling skull was necessary. It was. He wants flair. We're not just fixing teeth, we're captivating hearts while removing enamel. In 18th century France, tooth pulling wasn't just medical, it was art. Live demos were popular, drawing crowds eager for spectacle. A skilled barber could elevate molar removal into performative healing. You hand out pamphlets printed with dramatic titles, The Screaming Bicuspids and Pain Before Enlightenment. There's buzz. Someone brought snacks. On stage, your mentor dons his powdered wig and blood-striped apron. He introduces today's volunteer, a cheesemonger named Luke, with a visible gum boil and inexplicable optimism. Luke waves. The crowd claps. You lower the lantern for dramatic effect. The extraction begins. Forceps are wielded with flourish. Luke winces, the audience gasps, and then a satisfying pop. The tooth flies, hits the stall canopy, and lands in a barrel of turnips. A child cheers. Luke bows with bleeding grace. You sketch his victorious profile. One mainstream historical fact: these public displays were sanctioned by guilds to promote barber surgeons and assure civilians that science, however loosely defined, was on their side. But scholars still argue whether the events genuinely boosted dental health or were just blood-soaked carnivals disguised as education. You clean the extracted molar, holding it up like a trophy. "This," the barber whispers, "goes in the jar." Said jar is a monstrosity of glass and fear, filled with cloudy liquid and dozens of disembodied teeth. Tourists occasionally ask if it's soup. It's not. Your mentor encourages audience participation. "Guess the molar," he shouts, and hands you a chalkboard. You tally responses, upper left, lower right, Luke's soul, and one child who simply writes banana. You reward creativity with a candy, non-stick variety. The town musicians chime in with lute melodies as Luke's gums are stitched using black thread and hopeful thoughts. You pass out clove bundles labeled emergency pillow substitute. No one asks for clarification. You also display anatomical drawings, some accurate, others invented to match local folklore. One poster claims molars hide secrets if pulled during a thunderstorm. Another says smiling too broadly after extraction could summon ghosts. You avoid discussing your own experience during last month's harvest festival. One fringe tidbit: some barbers painted extracted teeth gold and turned them into cufflinks or charms. You catch your mentor polishing a molar with cinnamon and muttering, "Very Baroque." Near the stall, skeptics gather, arms crossed. "Is this ethical?" one murmurs. "Do teeth deserve applause?" You reply calmly, "Would you prefer a lecture in Latin?" The man walks away. Children queue for sketches of their own smiles. You draw gently, exaggerating dimples, minimizing plaque. One girl offers you a button for payment. You now own 4. As the crowd dwindles and the sun dips behind rooftops, Luke sips broth while you document his recovery in a logbook titled Smiles Restored. You sketch his stitched mouth, adding tiny stars for flair. Your mentor looks pleased. "We gave them education," he says. You nod. "And trauma." He claps your back. "Balance." That evening, you inventory teeth, ink diagrams, and marvel at how art and agony mingle on the cobblestones. You drift to sleep, hearing cheers echo in your dreams, alongside the soft, persistent crunch of enamel being undone.
You slide into your apron, powdered wig already perched atop your head like a cloud with secrets. Your reflection in the cracked mirror offers a contradiction. The clean elegance of high society above the shoulders, and below, a cloth so stained it could write its own tragedy. You look like a noble in exile, or perhaps a valet who moonlights in battlefield dentistry. Either way, you're ready. The dual identity of the 18th-century French barber is full of odd contrasts. The powdered wig was a badge of civility, often scented with lavender or bergamot, turned slightly askew for flair. It said, "I belong among the refined." Meanwhile, your apron whispered, "I pulled molars during lunch." This strange balance was typical. Hygiene standards were flexible. You could serve a viscount with wine-spritzed sideburns at noon and drain a drunkard's boils by tea. Your hands were elegant and horrifying. One client described you as a painter with pliers. You took that as a compliment. Historians still argue whether this genteel presentation was a marketing strategy or a genuine attempt at dignity. Clients certainly responded better when their tormentor looked like a duchess's confidant. You comb your rig daily and starch your collar like someone's watching. Let's talk laundry, or rather the absence of it. The apron rarely saw a bucket. Bloodstains became hieroglyphics of achievement. One smear from a royal jaw, another a peasant's back cyst. You call them my red credentials. You start to develop apron pride. And yet, even in this contradiction, there's a logic. The pristine wig was for the client. The grimy apron was for honesty. It said, "I've worked, I've yanked, stitched, and bled beside the alley cats." You wear both like armor. Occasionally, you forget to switch aprons before visiting the opera. A woman faints at the sight. You tell her it's artistic flair. She calls a priest. You keep a spare prayer in your pocket. One fringe tidbit: some barbers used blue-tinted powder to evoke calm. Others dabbed their wigs with clove oil, not for the scent, but to hide the smell of burned tooth roots. You learn to layer, citrus atop trauma. Your mentor insists you stand tall. "Elegance invites surrender," he says, adjusting your cravat while blood pools on the floorboards. You nod, adjust your cuffs, and greet the next screaming customer. In certain districts, barbers added lace trim to their sleeves, dentistry with decorative flourish. One shop used silk curtains to shield patients. You used one to mop up spilled brandy last Tuesday. The curtain was never the same. As the day passes, your outfit sees battle. A tooth splatters onto your cuff. A tongue depressor slips, leaving a streak across your vest. By evening, you look like a noble surviving a revolution. You call it haute horror. The wig, meanwhile, remains immaculate. You powdered it twice between jaw resets. Clients compliment your serenity. You don't tell them your knees are shaking. The illusion must hold. You develop a routine. Dip the apron in vinegar weekly, brush the wig daily, match your smile to the lighting. You're a performance, a paradox. And as you lean into your craft, you begin to understand. Being a barber isn't just technique, it's theater. Every stain, every strand, every twitch of a powdered curl tells a story. That night, you peel off the apron with ceremonial care and rest your wig in a box lined with lavender. You sleep in clothes that still smell faintly of mint and molar. Tomorrow, you'll dress again in this odd costume, clean above, chaos below, and face another parade of jaws.
You're summoned to a velvet-draped salon tucked behind a perfumery near the scene. The candlelight glows golden against tapestries and porcelain, but something smells off. Sour wine, wilted lilacs, and the unmistakable whiff of bad dental decisions. You're here to examine the king's molars. No pressure. In 18th century France, royal dental problems were not just personal, they were political. A monarch's breath could clear a room or seal an alliance. Louis XV, for example, reportedly suffered chronic mouth rot, his smile a battlefield of decay and stubbornness. You enter cautiously, unsure whether you're meeting a sovereign or a medically neglected scarecrow. The royal chamberlain ushers you forward. The king reclines, powdered face slack, lips pursed like he's reconsidering monarchy entirely. You gently pry open his mouth with a silver speculum and behold the state of a nation, molars flaking like pastry crust, gums receding with historic precision. You murmur, "Mild tenderness," and the chamberlain faints. Historians still argue whether Louis's dental decline weakened his charisma or merely thickened the cloud of resentment around him. Diplomatic dinners reportedly ended early to avoid exposure to his mouth. One ambassador allegedly offered terms just to escape dessert. As royal barber surgeon for the day, you prepare a rinse. It includes clove,
mint and dissolved pearls, because royalty expects luxury even when gargling pain. The king winces. You explain the pearls add regal shimmer. He nods weakly. You recommend a temporary tooth cover crafted from ivory. It fits poorly and makes him whistle involuntarily. This somehow improves morale. Meanwhile, his mistress whispers rumors to her ladies. He dreams of extraction, but fears revolution. You pretend not to hear, polishing forceps with a cloth embroidered with fleur-de-lis. One fringe tidbit? Diplomats often read monarchs' dental health as political omens. Bad breath meant instability. A rotting incisor hinted at rebellion. I once overheard someone say, "If the molars crack, so does the throne." The king, weary, declines extraction. "Let it ache," he mutters, "so I may feel what France feels." You nearly applaud this poetic misery. Back in the staff quarters, you compare notes with fellow barbers. "His left bicuspid dreams of freedom," one writes. You add, "His premolar is quietly conspiring." It's all very Shakespearean. The wigmaker confesses that he's been adding lavender sprigs to the king's curls, not for fashion, but to mask oral fallout. You respect the hustle. Later, you attend a diplomatic soirée where nobles drink cautiously and speak sideways to avoid direct mouth exposure. One lord boasts he hasn't shown his teeth since Easter. Another fans his own face. Your job extends beyond extractions. You're now part of dental diplomacy. You charm foreign ministers with tales of successful root scrapings and smooth incisor resets. It's all propaganda, really. You nod and say, "His smile grows stronger with every sunrise." As you leave the palace, the air tastes of clove and complication. You've faced the royal rot and survived. You tuck the memory inside your journal beside a sketch of the ivory whistle tooth. And as Paris sleeps, you wonder, can a decaying molar topple an empire? You suspect yes. But for now, you'll dream of clean gums and less poetic monarchs. You wake to the sound of boiling frog legs. Not from a stew pot, but from a bubbling cauldron your mentor insists is medicinal. Today, you delve into the world of questionable dental remedies, where toothworms are public enemy number one, and mint has heroic aspirations. In 18th century France, toothaches were common and terrifying. With sugary diets, rare brushing, and oral trauma on a weekly schedule, it's no wonder people turned to folk medicine. Some believe tooth pain was caused by worms living in the teeth, tiny creatures burrowing into molars and whispering curses. The cure? Smoke them out. Literally. Your first patient today arrives chewing clove and muttering about the worm's revenge. You offer clove oil, vinegar swabs, and the time-honored tradition of pacing while groaning. He asks if frog solve would help. You check your notes, sigh, and begin grinding amphibian thigh into mint paste. Historians still argue whether these fringe treatments stemmed from genuine medical attempts or desperation dressed up in rhyme. The frog salve was believed to cool the mouth's anger. Another remedy involved placing snails directly onto the gums. You try this once. The snail escapes. The patient cries. Your mentor swears by clove smoke. You light a bundle and waft it around the client's jaw while reciting a poem about molars and meadows. This encourages oral harmony, he says. You nod, hide your doubts in your sleeve, and apply more smoke. Some patients request poppy seeds crushed into wine. Others chew burnt bread crust.
One woman insists on whispering her secrets to a rose before swallowing it whole. You label that experimental. One fringe theory claims toothworms hate the sound of bells. You test this with a footman holding a dinner bell near a groaning noble. The noble screams. The worm remains. You blame improper pitch. Clove becomes your savior. You tuck bundles into every pocket. You even wear a sash made of mint leaves. Locals start calling you the aromatic angel. You consider branding. Meanwhile, you sketch diagrams of supposed toothworms based on witness descriptions. They range from thread-like whispers to miniature dragons. You display them in the shop window, labeled Monsters of the Mouth. Your mentor tries a new method, freezing the mouth with iced wine, then shocking the tooth with a slap. It works once. The second patient bites him. You add gloves to the inventory. As your confidence grows, you blend cures, clove smoke with frog salve and bell chimes. The patient feels nothing but applauds the performance. You curtsy, just a little. One day, a scholar visits scoffing at folk remedies. He requests a standard tooth extraction. You comply. He faints. Your mentor whispers, "Next time offer the frog." At night, you log each remedy's success rate. Clove scores highest. Frog salve ranks low, but earns points for dramatic flair. Toothworms remain elusive. You begin to suspect they're metaphorical or vengeful. You fall asleep surrounded by herbal bundles, mint sachets, and one remaining snail you've named Pierre. He wiggles near your pillow as you dream of smoke, teeth, and silent bell chimes that maybe, just maybe, work on Tuesdays.
You slump into your corner of the shop, clutching a jar of cloves, mentally bracing for another day of professional pettiness and powdered hostility. Paris is tense, not because of toothaches, well, also that, but because the great turf war between physicians and barber surgeons is reaching new dramatic heights. It's less healing arts and more back-alley ego clash. In 18th-century France, the distinction between learned physicians and hands-on barbers was blurry, territorial, and full of scandal. Physicians, formally trained, Latin-speaking, pomp-wigged aristocrats looked down their noses at barber surgeons who lacked university credentials but had actual experience yanking molars and patching bullet holes. You, naturally, represent the second camp, armed with bandages and a slightly bruised ego. Your first patient of the morning arrives mumbling about rivalries. "Doctor said only leeches," he groans, "but Pierre the barber said yank the tooth, then burn sage." You nod solemnly, preparing both treatments, just in case. Historians still argue whether these turf wars stifled progress or fueled innovation. The truth? A little of both. Physicians pushed for theoretical advancements, but barbers tackled emergencies without waiting for a Latin footnote. One witty pamphlet published anonymously, you have your suspicions. Read, "Trust not he who wears gloves while touching teeth." The guild system didn't help. Physicians had their own elite circles, their meetings full of wine and polysyllabic disdain. Barber surgeons had rougher lodgings, more bloodstains, and storytelling that involved tooth fragments and near stabbings. You've attended both. One serves soufflé, the other pickled eel. Fringe beliefs swirl as well. Some barbers claim physicians drain soul essence with overbleeding. Physicians accuse barbers of witchcraft, especially when extractions are followed by celebratory dances. You've never danced post-molar, but you've thought about it. You see the resentment play out on the streets. One day, a barber and physician get into an argument in front of the spice merchant. Words are exchanged. So are herbs. You witness the physician throw a wig. The barber retaliates with a clove sachet to the eye. Victory is unclear, but the merchant starts selling medicinal dual herbs the next day. You learn to spot physician arrogance at 20 paces. Perfect posture, unreadable handwriting, and the phrase, "I suppose the barber tried something," dripping with condescension. You counter with, "Yes, we also don't wear 16 rings while slicing gums." Eventually, the medical world begins changing. Teeth become a field of their own. Dentistry starts separating from general surgery. But for now, you're the middle child of medicine, nodding respectfully while applying frog slave. Patients are often caught in the crossfire. One noble insists on both physician diagnosis and barber extraction. You spend the afternoon waiting for the physician to finish his lecture. You fall asleep. When you wake, it's already extraction time. One fringe tidbit: a barber in Lyon invented a rival cloak, half fine velvet, half blood-stained linen, to represent both artistry and grit. He wore it once. The Physician Guild requested exile. You send him a letter of admiration. Despite tensions, some cross-trained professionals emerged. You meet one who speaks Latin while cleaning earwax. Impressive, if confusing. He invites you to a symposium. You bring molars in a pouch. No one talks to you after that. That evening, you tuck away your tools and sketch a chart. Barber's advantages versus physician's smugness. Under advantages, you list practicality, speed, fewer poetry recitals. Under smugness, you draw a wig with its nose in the air. You sleep with cloves under your pillow, dreams full of debates, rival cloaks, and molars that whisper, "Let barbers reign." You nod in your sleep and promise to keep fighting, not just cavities, but condescension.
You squint against cannon smoke and the whiff of boiled leather as a drummer marches past, feet pounding rhythm into mud and memory. You're not in the shop today, you're in the field, pressed into service beside the regiments, performing impromptu surgery with shears, clamps, and prayers. The barber's chair? Replaced by an overturned crate. Sterile cloth? You've got a horse blanket soaked in eau de cologne. In 18th century France, barbers often followed troops into battle, serving as de facto medics. Their experience with trauma, jaw resets, boil lancing, tooth extraction, translated poorly but efficiently into battlefield triage. You wear a wig still, powdered despite the soot, because even here, image matters. No one trusts a surgeon who looks like a chimney sweep. Your first patient is a soldier with a torn cheek and a chipped incisor. You stitch him with thread stolen from an officer's spare breeches. He thanks you while vomiting blood. You nod, honored. Historians still argue whether barbers on battlefields saved lives or simply delayed death, your mentor once whispered while prepping a cauterizing rod. You now understand that both can be true. You witness things: a sword lodged in a shoulder, a shattered knee, a molar so stubborn it needs a chisel. You perform all this while dodging cannon debris and humming lullabies. You develop speed, detachment, and an unsettling fondness for boiled bandages. Sometimes you bleed men not because it helps, but because it gives them hope. One general insists on a pre-battle bloodletting ritual. It purifies cowardice, he claims. You nick his vein and pray it also purifies arrogance. You're surrounded by smells, gunpowder, sweat, tobacco, and decay. You mask it with clove smoke wafted from your cape, the same one stitched from opera curtains months ago. It now sports burn marks and patriotic embroidery. You wear it with both irony and pride. You perform one-handed extractions during cavalry charges. A soldier bites down on your wrist mid-pull. You finish the job anyway. He weeps. You gift him the molar in a pouch of mint. He names it Henri. Fringe wisdom arises. Some soldiers believe extracted teeth bring luck. They carry molars on strings, trade them for alcohol, or plant them in enemy soil to curse the field. You sketch this in your notebook titled Dental Superstitions and Gunpowder Etiquette. One night, you stitch a drummer's shattered lip while listening to violin. Another evening, you boil lice off scalp wounds using soap and rage. You once use a saber hilt as a jaw brace. It works. Physicians, when present, write notes. You write poetry with your apron. Blood patterns make verses. He bled bravely, one stain reads. You start imagining molars with opinions. One looks smug. Another seems mournful. Your kit evolves. Scissors dulled, clamps bent, forceps engraved with vulgar poetry. You add bandages soaked in chamomile. You start brewing frog salve again. The soldiers call it courage jelly. You don't correct them. You develop battlefield extraction styles, the snap retreat, the whisper yank, the widow's pluck. They're effective, horrifying, and strangely admired. One corporal gifts you a feather for services rendered under cannon fire. You wear it in your wig. At camp, you conduct post-battle rinses with wine and sage. You call it mouth mass. Attendance varies. And when you finally return to the shop months later, your hands tremble not from fear, but from habit. You grip forceps like you're bracing for impact. You wear your cloak like armor. Civilians gasp. You smile. I've seen molars under siege, you say. No one asks what that means.
You arrive fashionably late to a surgical salon disguised as a wine tasting. Candles flicker over velvet curtains. Harpsichord music drifts from the far end of the room, and in the center, a silver tray gleams with today's attractions. Freshly extracted molars, still glistening and labeled with handwritten tags. The guests sip burgundy, nod approvingly, and place bets on whose tooth is next. In 18th century France, especially in certain eccentric circles of the bourgeoisie, medical procedures were blended into social events. Bloodletting banquets were real. Occasions where members of society paid for the privilege of watching, discussing, or even experiencing curated pain, all in the name of health and fashion. You blink twice when the hostess, Madame Perignon, gestures toward a reclining chaise and whispers, "Bleed me between hors d'oeuvres." You prepare her lancet beside a bowl of pear-scented rinse. She fans herself and murmurs about the moon's influence on bodily fluids. "Waning crescent," she says, "ideal for letting go of sadness." You nick her vein. The blood trickles perfectly, like wine from a tap. Applause erupts. Someone refills your glass. Historians still argue whether these rituals were rooted in genuine wellness trends or simply social theater. Regardless, they happened. You assist a merchant in removing a molar while a poet recites verses about impermanence. A toast follows. You feel wildly underdressed. Tonight's auction features teeth from nobles, merchants, and one mysterious artist of great sensitivity.
You watch as bidders raise fans, coins, and one tax document. This premolar belonged to a painter who once fainted in a church, the announcer says. The bid jumps. You try to look impressed. One fringe theory circulating tonight: teeth contain memory. Each molar hums with secrets, whispers a man dressed like a violin. You nod and gently take back the wine glass he's been chewing on. You display your extraction tools on a silk cloth: forceps, needle, mirror, and a scented pouch labeled whimsy. The guests coo over the shine. One asks if they can pose with a pelican. You oblige. She beams with the delicate menace of someone who's never held their own molar. The evening swells with decadence. Bloodletting stations tucked between potted orchids. Tooth-pulling corners where amateur surgeons test their courage. One noble insists he can extract his own bicuspid. He faints before lifting the mirror. You're asked to narrate an extraction like a sporting event. She grips the armrests. The pelican makes contact. Tension builds. Ah, a victorious yank. Applause. You bow lightly. As midnight approaches, the tooth bazaar opens. Select molars polished to near pearl are sold for love charms, lucky talismans, and, one hopes, not stew. You spot a molar carved into the shape of a miniature swan. The crowd gasps. You sketch it for posterity. Fringe rumors swirled that some collectors grind old teeth into powder and mix it with wine for memory infusion. You pretend not to hear. Someone asks for your favorite enamel texture. You suggest mysterious and slightly tragic. A poet offers a trade: her freshly extracted molar for one of your sketches. You accept. She sobs, says art demands sacrifice, and floats away. The salon quiets. Guests bleed gently, sip wine, and exchange stories of past procedures. One woman reminisces about her 5th molar extraction like it was her first love. You nod, pretending that makes sense. Later, you help pack the molars into velvet pouches labeled with embroidered initials. Each tooth a relic, a memory, a story someone paid to watch unfold. As you exit into moonlight, your hands tinged with lavender and blood, you clutch your pouch of auctioned teeth, wondering if any whisper in your pocket. You think one hums. You hum back.
You return to the shop as the regulations roll in like storm clouds. New decrees, fresh frowns from the guild, and whispered rumors that the golden age of the barber surgeon might be drawing its final breath. You clutch your apron a little tighter, adjusting your powdered wig with a hint of rebellion. Your tray still gleams, your tools still intimidate, but something feels different. It's not just the occasional visit from a clipboard-wielding official, it's the atmosphere. Clients hesitate before entering. Physicians smugly distribute pamphlets declaring the superiority of proper dental science. The guild suggests stricter boundaries. Tooth-pulling? Perhaps no longer your territory. You sigh and pick up a molar from the jar, turning it over like a fossil from your glory days. The shift is gradual but undeniable. Extracting a molar now requires paperwork. Lancing an abscess must be supervised. And don't even think about battlefield amputations. Progress, the officials call it. You call it disrespectful to your well-earned bloodstains. Historians still argue whether this transition marked the rise of professionalism or the fall of practical wisdom. Certainly, the physicians are pleased. They write lengthy treatises and use words like asepsis and specialization. You whisper, "Just let me pull the tooth," and receive frowns. Your mentor retires early, muttering about frogs and glory. He leaves you a pouch of sage and a letter signed, "To the last molar magician." You hang it near your wash basin. It smells faintly of clove and sadness. The final extraction sneaks up on you, a stoic baker with a stubborn incisor. He sits, sighs, and says, "I trust you." You nod, channel decades of experience, and perform the pull with poetic elegance. No scream, no applause, just a clean snap and silent victory. You cradle the molar like it's royalty. "One for the archives," you whisper, placing it in the jar. Your jar. The jar you've carried from alley to battlefield to banquet. You label it Finn. Outside, children chatter about new dental offices. Sterile, they say, predictable. You watch them giggle and chew sugar sticks, knowing their molars will one day meet the sterile forceps of someone who's never patched a wound with embroidery thread. You sketch the jar that evening, every molar drawn with flair. You caption the page, "The Tooth Chronicles, Tales from the Chair." You consider printing copies. Perhaps this is your next career. And so your apron is folded, your tools stashed beneath floorboards like forbidden poetry. Your wig, still powdered, rests in lavender-lined retirement. But before sleep, you place one final clove beneath your pillow, a tribute, a whisper, a lullaby to molars long gone.
Now that the final tooth has been tucked away and the apron lies quiet in its drawer, you lean back in a chair that doesn't creak under nervous bodies. The shadows stretch long across the floorboards, soft and whispering. Candles flicker and the air cools, carrying with it traces of clove, mint, and faded laughter from market days past. The instruments, so often clanging, gleaming, glinting with drama, now sleep beside folded diagrams and ink sketches of molars smiling crookedly. The bustling days have slowed into a gentle hum, and your hands, once so quick and sure, rest calmly on your lap, fingers dusted faintly with lavender. You close the shop's shutters one last time, pausing to hear the muffled tap of footsteps echoing through cobbled streets. Somewhere a child giggles. Somewhere an incisor meets candy. You smile, knowing the cycle continues, even as the chair remains empty tonight. You light a final bundle of sage, letting its smoke twirl upward like the memory of every tooth you've ever known. There's no more audience, no more applause, just the slow rhythm of silence and breath. It's comforting, familiar, peaceful. The last molar hums in its jar, just softly, just for you. Sleep now, molar magician. Dream of jaws and powdered wigs, of frog solves and battlefield sutures. Let the fan's breeze carry you past gossip and gum boils, through the echoing cheers of one final extraction.